Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for week 1 of the Mindful Monkeys Better Together programme. In this video and the next 5 videos, I'll be talking to you about the material that you'll be delivering for each of those weeks. Now, if you're a parent listening to this training, it applies to you, and if you are going to be a certified practitioner, it also applies to you. I will be talking about how to deliver the programme at home, in one-to-one sessions and in group environment, because originally the programme was created when we were able to meet all together, which we will be again soon, and it was in a group environment in the community. It can also be delivered, as we know, one-to-one. So based on the previous training that you'll have received from me, what we're going to do now is build on that and add some more layers to the programme now that we have some stronger foundations. So the first slide we have here is about creating strong foundations, and the following information is really about how to look at how we structured the weeks and how we deliver the material within those weeks in a consistent manner. Okay, when we're setting up the group environment, it's about what do we do in that room prior to anybody arriving and people coming along. And in the next slide, it's talking about creating the same consistent behaviour every week from the practitioner, if that's you. And if you're a mummy or a daddy, then it's about how are we showing up consistently for our kids. In the practitioner level, we're looking at how do you manage that practically. So if you are using a room in an environment that you can't control, then you take along the things that you can control. So the same setup in the room, the same way every week. If you have children who are really anxious and nervous and a bit worried about things, if we change too much of that dynamic, it can make them feel quite uncomfortable. So I would go in and I would also put a blanket down on the floor. I would have Mike the monkey with me. And perhaps a few cushions. I would also have a table at the front and create an altar on there. I would take some crystals and set those out. I had wee trolls and things like that the kids loved as well. And also have a flip chart available in the room for you to be able to write on. If you're doing one-to-one, then it depends on how formal you want that setting to be if you're in your own environment. When I saw people one-to-one in my little cabin, sometimes I would do the setting the intentions. It's really good in a group environment because children of school age will generally have learning intentions and they would really understand what intentions are. So setting an intention every week, and the person who sets the intention gets to light the candle. It sort of creates a bit of a ritual around the process of coming to Mindful Monkeys, and it helps the parents to see how to be able to replicate that on a consistent manner if you do the same thing every week. Don't worry if you forget to do it, but just try and remind yourself, thinking about how you can create that consistency. I also have a room spray, because if you think about how we take on board all of our environment, we don't just listen, we feel things, we smell things as well. So it's continuing and looking at all the senses. Nothing too offensive, obviously, that's going to maybe upset people. I had a few different kind of sprays that helped me take away the sort of formal room and make it a bit more easy. If you're looking at that slide, we're looking at how to create that sort of calming environment, even though the things round about us might be crazy busy. Setting up a table with resources, so if people want to write things and they have books, I would give away a book at the beginning for the children and they would get to write in that book and they could doodle. They had a pack that was just for them, so I would have a pen and a pencil in there and a pad. One thing to say to you as well, and one thing to consider, but if we've not already talked about it, is as long as the children are safe and they're using their listening ears and they can listen to you, it doesn't matter if they're hanging off their chair or they're lying on the floor or they're under their chair, as long as they're in the room. What I've noticed immensely doing this group programme and even one-to-ones, if the children are doodling or doing something that parents don't think that they're listening, but they really are listening. And actually research shows us that if the children are occupied in something that's taken up their conscious mind, their subconscious will absolutely be listening, and they'll be taking on board lots and lots of different information, even though they might not actually be looking at you. If you can get eye contact, that's fine, but some children will be quite nervous. So creating strong foundations can be really formal if you're in a group scenario and you have a family of 8 people and you want to keep the consistent approach every week. And if you're on a one-to-one basis, then you can be less insistent on those particular things. I think when it comes to the group environment though, it's really good to have a group agreement. And a group agreement can have loads of different things in it. And the children will be used to that from a school environment. It should be quite light in its sense, not too prescriptive, but be created by them mostly. You want them to use their listening ears, even though they might be doodling, because if you can gain their agreement to these aspects, you can draw on that as the weeks go forward. Everyone gets a chance to be heard. I've never really needed a talking stick in any of the programmes, because we will hold ourselves as a practitioner to be the one that you would want to create the state for that session and be what it is that you would like others to be. So that's calm, consistent, not being triggered by the children's behaviour. And that can sometimes be one of the hardest things. But we have to find the pause between how we feel and why we would want to act, because we want to model that for the parents at the same time as being able to show the children that they might be trying to get your attention, but there are other ways of doing it. So group agreement is be respectful, can have one person talking at a time, and always be kind. So there's lots and lots of different ways to create agreements, but I would say though there's sort of 5 different. So use your ears, everyone gets a chance to be heard, be respectful, one person talking at a time, and be kind. So that's how to think about creating those strong foundations, and every week you would want to do that. If you're in a group environment, you want to create that consistent approach so that they know what they're coming into. What that allows them to do is it allows them to go deeper into themselves each week, because there's not so many things that they don't know about, and then they can come into the actual environment ready, eager. Generally find the entry behaviour in the first week is really quite nervous, because they don't know where they're coming, they don't know who's going to be there, they don't have never met me before, they never met you before. If you're working in a school environment, maybe they have met you before, but not in the way that they'll have met you when you're doing the Better Together programme. So you have to be that strong foundation and that consistent person for both the parents and for the children. So that's the first thing for us to consider. The next slide brings us into the actual weekly Mindful Monkey programme material. So this is week 1, which is monkey mindset. We want to create that environment by doing the initial setting up of the room, which we've just talked about. And then what I'm going to take you through is what are the overall learning objectives and what are the expectations that you have as a practitioner. So the learning objectives for week 1 is that they'll learn how their brains and body are connected, that what happens in our brain when we're feeling big emotions, and the functions of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. For parents, it's for them to understand how the amygdala and the hijack affects the children's ability to be able to communicate. This is one of the key aspects of the whole programme, which I'll talk about when we get to that slide. For children and parents to learn about neuroplasticity, so things that aren't structured the way that we think they are, and research shows us that the brain is a lot more malleable and changeable than we ever thought possible. And children absolutely love to find out about their brains and how their behaviour isn't stuck. And science helps us to be able to do that. And finally, learn 3 useful strategies to help regulate our monkey mind. So that's the overarching objectives. But because it's a multi-layered programme, there are actually objectives for the children and for the parents for each session. Don't worry if this feels a bit overwhelming. It's not. It will be as you deliver the programme, and you will actually learn how the material actually lets you meet the children where they are, but also helps you to help the parents really understand their children, but also themselves better as well. So the learning objectives and the focus for the children on week 1 is that their brains are really amazing and they're adaptable. That neuroplasticity tells them that if they keep trying different things, that they can change the way their brain is structured, and the things that they were finding difficult or less difficult, they have the ability to grow their brains and do difficult things. Even in practice is the thing that's going to help them to do that, and also how to deal with the amygdala reaction themselves using different strategies. Depending on the age of the children when they come and see you or work alongside you, they might be just learning about emotions, or they might not have good emotional literacy, and that's depending on your skills. You'll be able to help support them at whatever age then and whatever emotional age they're at. Remember, the children may be age 9, but their emotional age may be 7. Okay, and that's a lot of to do with expectations versus the actual reality of the children. We do get into that in more detail in the next few modules. But for you as a practitioner, it's good for you to know that you're dealing with the emotional age of the children in front of you, not the actual age of the child chronologically. And the children's focus is to help them to identify emotions and speak about them. Now, they might be able to say that they're angry, but they might not be able to know what to do when they're angry. And it's very much the focus of this programme. The focus for the parents, is that their presence and how they are with their children is of the utmost importance. And there will be many layers through which they will see their children, but their presence by their side when they're dealing with and struggling with whatever it is that they're struggling with is the key part of this. And if you're working with a parent who is feeling that they've got a bit of a wobble and they're not really sure if they're doing the right thing, creating that strong foundation every week is really important. But you having that strong foundation, that presence with the parent, will let them see what that looks like and what that feels like, and then model that. We want to become the role model for these families. They'll learn that their children's brains can grow and adapt. It might feel difficult, but they can through practice and consistent approach. But also to give them a wee sort of heads up that their brains can change also. So just because they might have tried lots of different things doesn't mean that they can't adapt and change alongside their child at the same time. They'll also find out why their children can't always be rational when their amygdala is taken over, and they have to wait till the brain reconnects with the right areas in order to have those types of conversations that say, let's do that differently the next time. They want to focus on creating strategies with their kids when they're faced with these challenges and emotional situations. Some of them won't be able to do that themselves, when parents will be able to decide amongst themselves. I think they're actually really good at being able to deal with that small thing themselves, whereas before they might not have. But the brilliant thing about the programme is that it creates the environment where those conversations can actually take place. And the last bit is actually to be able to help them. I'm working with a family just now whose child seems to be up all the time or then really low. And what we're working on is being able to help the child to identify what those emotions are, so that we can actually start to have more rounded conversations about emotions and what they all actually mean. So just to have a look at the session overview for week 1. So the session overview lets us have a look at what you'll do during that one session. So you'll welcome and set the scene. So for the first week, they are going to be really anxious and nervous and not sure about things. So obviously you'll have spoken to them prior to coming along, so you'll know them and you'll know the child's name. So you'll be able to welcome them, especially the parent that you've spoken to on the phone, but you might not have met the child before. So you'll welcome them, set the scene, you'll light the candle and set the intention, which is what we did. If that's applicable in the group scenario, you'll set up a group agreement. And the first thing that you're going to do, which is a bit of fun to get everybody going out, is actually the picture on the right is of one of these little chaps. Okay, and that's one of these little people, and that's your inner child, right? And you're going to hand that out, and it's just a bit of fun, gets everybody laughing and relaxing a wee bit more. It's one of these funny little inner children. You can buy them off Amazon for some cheapest chips, but it's funny, and it sort of relaxes people and lets them know that even though you're talking about things that are really important, you're going to have a bit of a giggle and a laugh. So this is the inner child, and it's really important that you hand that over. I've actually had tears from people when they've done this, because it's let them see that they've got some healing to do themselves. I truly believe that parents have a lot of healing to do alongside their children, and this really sets the tone for the group to say it's not just about your kids, it's about us all learning about our inner children. So it's a bit fun, but it's also to say to the parents, I want you to come at this from your children's point of view. We don't want to just wait and intellectually connect with our children, we want to connect with them emotionally. So this is a bit of fun, but it actually has great purpose, which is to really just get them to reference their own childhood. Can be sometimes difficult for people, but we don't go into that in a group environment as much as you would in a one-to-one situation, but that would be led by your expertise as the practitioner. The programme's an opportunity for parents to either parent the way they were parented with more confidence, or to parent a different way and not feel guilty about that. Even though they may have experienced great trauma in their own childhood, it is possible through this programme to begin to change that and to develop together alongside their children. So this really sets the tone for that. The next session would be talking about the mind-body connection, and we'll get onto that in the next slide. Neuroplasticity we'll definitely be talking about, and then the week one monkey mindset handout, which you will have a copy of, and you can see on the right hand side of that slide there, the PDF will be online for you to download that. So that is week one overview. So week one, the first thing that you want to sit down. Now you can either sit down if you're in a group environment. I would always sit down on the floor, and the kids would end up coming sitting beside me on my little rug. If you're in a one-to-one situation, you might not have to do that, but you can sit in the chair. But I always like to do a really simple exercise, which again gets people sort of moving about and talking about the mind-body connection and how we actually embody the emotions. And the Inside Out film is just so good at this, because it allows us to explore the sort of 5 main emotions, primary emotions that were included in that film. And every single child that I've ever spoken to about this film has come at it from a different way, and has probably remembered an enormous amount more than their parents would give them credit for. So it's a really, really good chatting point. And when you do the intake discussion with each parent, always ask if they've seen the Inside Out movie. And if they haven't, strongly encourage them to do so, especially in a group environment. When you're doing one-to-one, if they haven't talked, then I would say that get them to be able to see that film if possible. Most of the families I've worked with, bar a couple, have seen the film, and the children have loved it. Personally, I think it's one of the best films ever. So asking them to think about the characters in the film. So the handout that you will have access to online again will be this one. What is the Inside Out film taught us about big emotions? So asking them to identify anger, getting them to think about what comes out the top of Anger's head when he's angry. And they love the fact that he bangs his fists down and the fire comes out the top of his head. And then getting them to think about it's joy, and the fact that she exemplifies joy, and her chin is up and her shoulders are back, and she's got this big cheesy grin on her face, and she's super excited to be talking, and her arms are flailing about. So if you were to draw joy, that's what they drew. And then sadness, obviously chin is down, the shoulders are over, she sort of drags her body, she moves a bit more slumped, her eyes are looking down. You can tell that she's sad. And you can talk about the colours as well if you wish. You know, she's feeling blue and anger is really red and disgust is like, oh, whatever. Get them to think about the vegetables that they don't like, or I would come to fear probably one of the last times, because the majority of the children that I work with are aware of fear because they feel it, and they can feel shame and fear, and it often feels the same. So really good, robust discussion about that. Even though next week is mindful emotions, we start that conversation this week. And you can reference and say, today we're just talking about the start of the film and all these amazing things, but next week we'll talk about Inside Out even more. One of the really interesting things to do is get them to stand up and get them to, and it's a bit daft, and you might feel like a bit of an idiot doing it, but actually, once you get over the embarrassment, it has a purpose. It gets kids up and gets them moving around. And for those children who are anxious and nervous, it gets them moving their body. It's to get them to think about joy. And what she had on her face at the time was really a big, huge, cheesy grin, and get them to smile. Okay? And then once you've done that, get them to hold their body as if they were as if they were sadness. Okay? And then get them to be joy again, and get them to smile. And then ask them to feel sad without changing their mouth, right? So to feel sad, you can't, it's really difficult to feel sad when you're smiling. The mirror neuron system in our face tells our brain and our immune system that we're not sad when we're smiling. So if we're smiling, like proper smiling, and then don't move our face, it's really hard to feel sad, right? So I know people sometimes say you're putting a mask on, but to genuinely have that smile on your face and then actually actively try and be sad is almost impossible to do. So what we're trying to say is there is a correlation between how you feel in your body and how you're moving your body and how you feel in emotions. Okay, so we're saying to parents at this point, if your child's angry or feeling sad or having a really uncomfortable reaction or an unpleasant emotion that we'll talk more about the following week, then it's a case in point that they may wish to move their body. So just because if a child's feeling a really strong emotion, then one of the ways to change that is to actually get them to move their body and change their body. There's a young boy I worked with who got angry and he put his hands down in these really big fists, and we worked with him to move around the anger around his body and change how he physically moved and held his body when he was angry. Now that's not to honour the emotion that they're having, it's to start to find a strategy for moving that energy, because emotions are just energy and motion. And again, we'll talk about that more next week. But it's just beginning to put the thought of that and the understanding of that into a parent's mind, and they'll start to go, oh, is that why he goes on the trampoline? Yes, quite often when a child's feeling really anxious, get them to run around, move around, play football. One of the things I used to love recommending to young boys especially was to play the drums. Go for drumming lessons. It's a really good way of getting rid of aggression and that feeling of anger. So if you have a trampoline, if they can play football, if the girls can go and skip. I know that's very sexist, doesn't it, what I've just said? Sorry about that. Anyone can go and skip. And just whatever they feel drawn to in terms of moving their body. So just starting to think about strategies for moving those emotions around the body. So this is just the first example of being able to do that. The second thing I wanted to talk to you about and to explain to the children is this thought about neuroplasticity. Now, for those of you who don't know what neuroplasticity, the explanation we have here is the brain's ability to reorganise itself by forming neural connections throughout life. Neuroplasticity allows the neurons or the nerve cells in the brain to compensate for injury and disease and to adjust their activities in response to new situations or to changes in the environment. The research around neuroplasticity is still in its infancy, it's still new, but it does show that we now know that the brain is more able to change its structure based on the environment in which it grows up. So even though there may have been early trauma in a child's brain, or even in the parent's brain, it is possible through practice and concerted effort to change that brain structure. And the handout on the right hand side, which says weekly handout, I have a copy here, and you have a very rudimental picture of a brain. But when I'm doing neuroplasticity, I just talk about the white lines in here and talking about the neural pathways that they create. Now, one of the pictures that I've got on the bottom right hand corner there is a picture of a little girl who's swimming with her mum and learning how to put her head under the water. Now, during the onboarding process and the intake form that you have with the parents, you'll find out about the children, right? So if you're in a group scenario, you'll know whether that you've got people who can play football, who've got gymnastics, they do swimming. You'll find out that some might do ballet, some might do dance, some might do golf. So depending on what you know about those children, you can start saying, when you create different parts in your brain, you're looking at, you've never always been able to play golf. You've never always been able to swim. Swim's a really good one because most of the children, not all of them, will have learned how to swim, and they will have created the structure in their brain and created new pathways in their brain that allow them to learn how to do that. And the more they use that new pathway for learning that skill, this pathway becomes stronger. And they build on that. So a good thing for swimming is that you can see them moving through the lanes and going from having armbands on to no armbands to then going from breaststroke to front crawl, etc. So, you know, it's all of those things. So even though there might be times within that environment when they've been doing stuff that we've been scared, they have been able to learn through the process of practice to do that particular skill. And actually managing our emotions isn't really much different from that. Although we take things so personally that often it can feel like it is. One of the videos that I've shared here is the Sentis brain animation series, which is a great explanation, and that's actually the image on the right in the middle, and it's on YouTube, so please head on over there. It's a fantastic video that allows people to understand that through the repetition and the process of trying a new way, then our brain becomes stronger, and the brain will actually prune away the old process. So even though you might have behaviour coming out of a child that's really difficult and they're not sure and they keep doing it even though they don't want to do it, what we do in the programme is we face them towards a new possibility and a new way of solving problems. It doesn't mean that the old way is not there, it just means that the focus is on the actual way that you would like us to rewire the brains and shape our brains, but it takes practice and the right level of support to be able to do that. So that's week 1, talking about neuroplasticity. The next thing we want to talk about when it comes to our brains, and what is actually mentioned within the handout that you have, again in here, are the 2 particular parts of the brain. Now the amygdala, or amygdalae, because there's actually 2 almond-shaped sections in the temporal lobe behind the ear, just inside behind the ear, inside the brain. And they're responsible for our perception of emotions such as fear, anger, sadness, as well as being able to control aggression. So for a lot of people, really, really important that we know that we have them. And they also store memories of events and emotions so we can recognise similar events. So if you think about a child who is maybe, or anyone who had an early experience of a dog, for example, got a fright with the dog, didn't like the dog, and now searches their environment for dogs, that's where that's held. So the amygdala is really important because it kicks off the fight, flight or freeze when it senses danger. And as this slide says, in 1995, Daniel Goleman wrote a book about emotional intelligence being more important than IQ, and I actually agree with him. But what his book was talking about is that although we've evolved as humans, our brain has actually stayed the same way. And that is that it's structured in such a way that we would like to be able to respond swiftly when a threat is about. So that's what the primary function of our amygdala is to scan our environment, to tell us what we feel about what's going on around, and that would be based on previous experiences, but also how, viscerally what we feel about us. So children who are nervous or anxious to go to things, this is the part of their brain that will process that fear. So if the amygdala senses danger, fight or flight response will be triggered, cutting off the prefrontal cortex. So when we're talking about this slide to the children, or this handout, because children do actually understand about these, so it's an explanation at this point that that's what our amygdala does, so what it's responsible for, telling them exactly why we have the amygdala and why it's really important for the human species, and then explaining to them about the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is really, really important because it is the part of our brain that does all the listening. We make really good choices from our prefrontal cortex. That's where we problem solve. That's where all our executive functioning comes from, in the prefrontal cortex. So when you're in your session, ask the children to just choose whoever. If it's a one-to-one, it's very easy to do. If it's in a group scenario, find out if any of the children can tell you 4 things they need to go to swimming, or 3 things you need to go to golf, or whatever, because that's the part of their brain that will help them to solve problems. That'll their memory of the thing that they need to actually get to go to that class, and that allows them to see that they're using this part of their brain. And you can reference, when you're talking about the amygdala, times when they've maybe felt a wee bit scared. Now, you'll know about the children because you've spoken to the parents, but don't speak to them specifically about any of their fears at this point. We're gaining trust, we're building rapport, and we are finding a way of engaging with children at this point. If we get too specific too early, unless that child offers up that information, that's very private. So we're at this point just talking about what our brains do, and everybody's brain does the same thing. So whilst our amygdala is doing a really good job because it's trying to keep us safe, and that's its primary role, it sometimes gets in the way. And what the amygdala, and this is the monkey part of their brain, as I refer to in the Mindful Monkeys program, it kind of stops us from doing the things that we want to do, because we don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore. And it kind of tells us a bit of a story about why we shouldn't do the things we want to do. And it can take over sometimes. And when it takes over, if it takes over really, really quickly and about something that we feel really scared of, these 2 parts of the brain actually can't talk to one another. So when you're explaining what I've just said to the children, you're just talking about our brains in general. But when they're listening, they're thinking about themselves. And the same can be said for the parents. Because for us to have good chats and good discussions and to be able to work through new strategies, we need these parts of the brain to be working together. And evidence shows us the more we ignore the amygdala, the louder it gets. And in some children who have experienced great trauma, their amygdala is actually larger size, and will be more obvious and be more part of the decision-making process, even in adulthood, unless we start to understand what's driving our decisions on a day-to-day basis. Is it the amygdala, or are we using the executive function in our sort of grown-up prefrontal cortex? So at this point, we're talking about what each part of the brain does. So executive functioning, problem solving, decision making. As they grow up, it's their personality. So when you're talking about the Inside Out movie, that's the islands of personality. And then here we're talking about the part of our brain that processes and tells us about fear, sadness, as well as control and aggression, but maybe not so much aggression when we're talking to the kids. So when they know that, and when we're talking about that, and we need this part of the brain online, if you like, then we'll move on to sometimes when the amygdala gets really frightened really quickly, then we can do this thing called flipping our lid. So the next part of this session is to show them example of flipping their lid. And what we want to be able to do is this is my hand on the slide, but we're talking about, and we get the parents and the children to put their hand up, and we are going to show them what that looks like, and then get them, so this is the limbics, this is the brain stem coming up here, then we're going to put the finger into the middle, which is the amygdala, and then we're going to say, well, what a good brain looks like when it's connected is, bring that forward, and there's the prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain is connected to the amygdala, and we're getting all the messages through, and our brain's working the way that it should. But sometimes when we feel overwhelming, really strong emotions, we can do this. We can flip our lid. And then what happens in that scenario is that you have your amygdala, which is taken over from, sorry, there's the cat. The amygdala is taken over, and the prefrontal cortex has become detached from that part of our brain. Okay, so when that happens, it's called full amygdala hijack. And in the previous slide, the amygdala hijack is when the brain becomes disconnected. They actually, because we're going into fight or flight, this is the part the amygdala takes over and detaches the prefrontal cortex. Now, when you have a child who's in a full amygdala hijack, they don't have the ability for reasoned and reasonable thought, and making good decisions and problem solving. So if we're trying to negotiate with a child or speak to a child, often their faculties are all over the place, and we'll have all got evidence of trying to work with a child who is in full on amygdala hijack. There's just no point, right? And at this point, when you're explaining it to a parent, if you're a parent listening to this, it's okay that we didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that. And so when we've got, excuse me, a cat who keeps coming and taking over. So we've got the amygdala in the middle, and we've got the prefrontal cortex. When you've got a child doing this, if we have a dysregulated adult who's also doing this, and we're trying to talk to one another from our emotional centres, that's not going to work. So what the programme is helping you to understand is that what we really need to make sure is that this part of the brain's actually working and connected before we can even start to think about how to solve what was going on for the amygdala to do that in the first place. Right? Does that make sense? We need to understand and be able to help the child regulate themselves before we can start working out good, successful strategies to work on and create that really good neural pathways to solve to create solutions for that. So we first of all need to understand that the amygdala is doing this and has the possibility to do this, and for the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, to go offline. And that's why we can't negotiate with children when they're doing that, because they can't make good decisions and work out successful strategies because the brain, the need's not working. And the same said for the parent. So what a parent needs to be supported on at this point in the programme and discussion is, how are you doing? Are you managing to regulate yourself before you try and help your child to regulate? Okay, so it's having a discussion at this point that this is what possibly is going on with the children when they're having full amygdala hijack. It's definitely what's happening, but sometimes they might not be in full amygdala hijack, but what research has shown us is the correlation between the two parts of the brain, so the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, becomes lessened, and it's not as strong as it needs to be in order for it to have those discussions that allow us to look at successful strategies, because that's actually what's going to come in the next session in the next week. Okay, so we've talked about the mind-body connection, we've talked about the ability of the brain to actually be malleable and it's plastic. We've looked at amygdala hijack, and shutting off the prefrontal cortex, be able to have those big discussions. And then we have looked at flipping your lid. So quite a lot for them to think about. If you think about, that's the main crux of the information for this. So it's about your brain is adaptable and changeable. We can do amazing things. I already know you can do the most amazing things, even though I bet there's sometimes you didn't think that you'd be able to do that. And we can understand where our emotions are processed and why we need that front part of our brain. And we can already do all those amazing things. And what we're going to talk about next in the programme is actually what to do. And that's on the back of this handout. We have this other breathing exercise. And tell the people that are on your programme and the parents and the children why the breathing is really important. Now, if you're in a group environment, I would bring in chimes and singing bowl at this point. Kids love the chimes and the singing bowl anyway. But actually, for me personally, it brings in a different vibe, because sometimes kids will be feeling a wee bit unsettled at this point. If you're bringing in the singing bowl and you bring in the chimes, it creates a wee bit of interest, lets the parents relax a wee bit, and also by the process of chiming and playing the singing bowl, it actually brings the energy down in the room and relaxes everybody a wee bit more. Then I would demonstrate the 4-5-8 breathing, either using the singing bowl or using the chimes. Most often I would use the chimes in class, because what I would do as well, which isn't in the slide, is actually, if you've got chimes, is actually use the chimes and I'm going to just actually use my listening ears. Remember we did in a group agreement, we're talking about listening ears. I wonder if we would be able to use our listening ears to see if they could put their hand up when they can't hear the chimes anymore. And if you speak in that way and get the children to listen, quite often you'll find them actually starting to calm down, sitting on the floor with you, and you've created that really good energy and vibe in the room. And then you do the breathing. So I like 4-5-8 breathing. Some children don't like the 4-5-8 breathing. To be perfectly honest with you, it doesn't matter what the number is. What we're trying to create is the awareness of why the breath is so important. And also to raise awareness of why counting is so important. So the counting is important because what the accounting does is it brings the prefrontal cortex back online. So if we're in the amygdala and we're feeling quite emotional, the breath allows us to come back to ourself and our body, but the counting allows our brain to start to assimilate our environment slightly differently as well. So the counting is important in order of our brain waves to be the right way, or in a better, more fruitful way. And the breathing itself is important because when people are anxious, adults and children, we don't breathe properly. We do high chest breathing. We do not breathe properly into our belly, and we certainly don't take the time to relax into our human bodies as often as we should. So 4-5-8 speaks for itself. You're breathing in for 4, hold in for 5, and out for 8. Now, every single time I do that, I always feel better. Right? Brings you back into your body, and you do that 3 times. Even on one-to-ones, if you're doing one-to-ones in person or you're doing them over online or in a group scenario, always do this 3 times. Even if there's children hanging off their seats, underneath their seats, colouring in, it doesn't matter, because you're creating the environment that allows that to space, the thing to take place, but also is starting to show the parents that it's okay if the children are not joining in, because eventually they will. If we create the space, they will come eventually, right? The 4-4-4 box breathing is one that the actual SAS use, because it brings their executive functioning, their decision making, their problem solving part of their brain up online, and it's quite good for children who are visually prompted, because it allows them to look at it as if it's a box. So you're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. In for 4, just following that through. So box breathing can also be really, really good. There's lots of other things out there that you're more than welcome to add to this area if you feel that you want to. There's belly breathing. Lots of groups do that and put a wee soft toy in their belly. It just allows the child to see their belly moving up and down. It depends on how much time you have during the session, whether it's the group or one-to-one session. You are be dictated to by that. The other demonstration is, remember, the breathing is important just as much as the counting because it brings that on. The demonstration of the grounding exercise is this part of the exercise down here, which is describing 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. Now, there's lots of reasons for using this exercise. Again, the countings, bringing the prefrontal cortex back online, but it's also bringing the child back into the present moment, into the environment they're in. Because if they're anxious and nervous and worried about something, they're not in the room because you've created this lovely environment. And that's the same thing that has to be said for the parents. You know, when are you going to use this exercise? Are you going to use it when the child's already feeling anxious and nervous? But bring them into the room. It brings the brain back online. And you can make it fun. It doesn't have to be boring. You know, you could do it in the car. If you're going somewhere that you're, for the first time after not being able to do things for a long time, then the child might be feeling really anxious and worried about doing something for the first time. So on the way to that thing, you actually use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and you do your breathing together. So what this first week is about, bringing awareness of why we would even want to do that. So because we now know more about the brain and the different regions in the brain and the important job that these regions do, we're not discounting to say that you're not allowed to be anxious or nervous. All emotions are valid because they tell us what we feel about what's happening round about us. Sometimes the behaviours that come out of those emotions and unpleasant emotions are not what we would like to see in ourselves or our children. And that's what we're going to talk about mostly next week. But this first week's about raising awareness of those areas of the brain, becoming more aware of when we are operating out of those particular parts of our brain. So how often are we making decisions out of this part? How often are we in this part of the brain, right? And beginning to build into the week breathing exercises. Now that goes for the parents as well as for the children. So if you're a parent watching this, start to breathe more regularly. Set a timer on your phone and get yourself to do that. Breathe this way before you're going to go into a situation. Breathe this way if you think, I don't know how to react to what's happening with my child right now. And if you're a practitioner, then think about being able to say those particular things to parents. Take a breath. If you're not quite sure why your child's acting the way that they are, now's the time to create that pause. The power of the pause is amazing, right? Gives you time to take stock, gives you time to draw breath. It gives you time to bring this part of your brain back online, because then you'll have a better understanding of how to help your child when you're not in your emotional centre. If they're wavering in theirs, you bring yours back online. So this week's really about exploring all those things. Finding a name for your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala. It's a wee bit more handy to say. Children can call their amygdala and prefrontal cortex whatever they want. So that's the demonstration of the breathing and the grounding exercise that we would like to bring that in at that point. And then that's the final part of this week. Quiet Time is introducing the MP3 stories. Now, I have got a picture of some keys, which I have here. Demonstration of one here. Oops. That's not really that easy to see. And then a wee pebble as well on here. Okay. So I have got a big bag of those, and when I used to do the programme, a one-to-one group scenario, I would take them along and each child would pick a key and a pebble for the first story. The first story is about a girl called Floss, and she is not feeling very confident, and this is between you and me, obviously you're not going to tell them all of this. She picks up a pebble on the beach, and when she feels that pebble, she feels really confident. And also there's a bit of an ambiguous part of the story, which is all about the special cupboard, and you need a key to get into this cupboard, right? Now, be as ambiguous as you can about what's in that cupboard and what it's for, because we're trying to open up the possibility of new things in that story. And if we're too specific about what that key is for and what the story really means, then we can actually start putting some of our stuff onto the kids. So just be quite ambiguous. Go, what do you think the key is for? When they come back to you in week 2 and go, I'm not quite sure what the key was for. Just, it doesn't have a particular answer, but it doesn't have a particular answer. It's just opening up their mind and their subconscious to that there could be a different way of dealing with their problems. So the home activities this week is to name their amygdala and prefrontal cortex, practice their breathing every day at home, and the children to use that. Because the older the children are, they can actually start to use their breathing. A lot of older children are a bit anxious about saying that they're doing something new, but the breathing allows them to be able to do that. So starting to create this little toolbox inside that nobody really needs to know about. The families to discuss more about the parts of the brain that we've talked about this week. To refer to flipping the lid, making it more normal to understand that we can do that. And then to become more aware of our emotions, not even just during stressful times, but also making reference to people that they might be watching on the telly. Oh, look, they look really happy, or oh my goodness, that must have been quite a sad situation for that person in whatever programme. So starting to raise awareness of emotions round about us on a more regular basis, because we want the children to really be able to identify when they're feeling these emotions that are in the Inside Out film on a more regular basis. So depending on where the children are before they come to Mindful Monkeys, they might already know when they're feeling that. And what we're really trying to do is help them to process the unpleasant ones. And some children might come and not really be that good at being able to identify their emotions. So depending on where the child is, depends on what the focus needs to be. And I think that's it for week 1. I think that's enough for this week. And then the final thing to remember to say is that our goal as practitioners is to help people to gain clarity about what the problem is for themselves, or what they would like things to, what it is they would like to change, to restore some balance before then asking the families to move forward. That will always be the mantra within any Mindful Monkeys programme, is to become clear on what it is that we want to change, finding ways to restore some balance into family life, and then looking at the positive way forward to promote the change and actually look at what it is that you would like to have, not always focus on what it is that you don't want. So all the things that we talked about in the initial first day of training, all those golden threads through the Mindful Monkeys programme. So I hope you found that useful. Thanks to Bailey, my cat, for making an appearance. I'm sure she'll come on lots of all the other videos. Just all part of the charm. So week 1, go out there, do your best, be the best person that you can be when we're trying to model that. But you know what? It's okay if we get things wrong too. Give yourself some forgiveness, because that's what we need our children to be able to see also. So, great stuff. Thanks for joining me week 1. I'll see you in the next video for week 2, all about mindful emotions. Thank you.